When I first started my agency, I did everything. I was building the websites, I was selling, I was doing the client invoicing, I was managing servers, I was sweeping the floors. I personally believe that the reason agencies get themselves into a situation where they're doing everything is because they're very resourceful people. Like, we can figure things out. But the downside to being able to do everything yourself is that we tend to do it and then we bury ourselves in a lot of work. Like, I was super stressed. At the beginning it was easy, but as I took on more clients, I just became more and more consumed by work. So what could be done about this? Ultimately, the answer is bringing in additional help. Being able to delegate the work to other people so that way it's not all dependent on you. Now, I had a business coach that brought this to my attention and said, Mike, it's time to hire. It's time to bring someone in. You are busy and you are getting to the point where you're going to stunt your ability to grow this business unless you figure this out. Now, the idea of bringing on an employee, that word just scared the heck out of me because I had no idea how I was going to afford it. And so I asked him, what do I do? How do I know it's time to hire? And the advice he gave me was super sage. He said, Mike, you got to know when to hire. And the way that you figure that out is when you can afford 50% of that person's wage or salary, that's when it's time to start looking. That's when it's time to bring them on. And at first I thought he was crazy. I'm like, I need to afford 100% of this, not 50%. And what he explained made a ton of sense. He said, Mike, you're so busy right now that you can't focus in on the most highest value actions that you should be doing in this business, which is sales. And if you were able to hand off some of this work to somebody else, you would be able to spend more time in the activity that's actually revenue generating. And he was absolutely right. I was able to bring somebody in, hand off work to them, so that way I could focus in on the stuff that only I could do and bringing in more business. And that's what freed me from having to do all the work myself. Now, I was super nervous at the idea of bringing on someone and not being able to afford it. And so he had one other piece of advice that I think is something that you want to pay attention to. He said that employees come with a 0% financing plan. And at first I was super confused, but then he explained that your employees and the team members that you hire, you don't have to come up with the entire salary for their first year at once. Because in my mind, when I thought about hiring someone, I was thinking about everything I was gonna have to pay them. I was looking at their annual salary, and that seemed like a crazy big number that I had no idea how I was actually going to achieve that. So he had me take that number and divide it by 26, the number of pay periods in a year. Now, suddenly that number didn't look quite as scary. And worst case scenario, if it didn't work out, like, I would probably know within 30 to 60 days, and I could cut my losses then. Now what I was committing to was not a full year, but I was committing to perhaps a 90-day period where I was going to see if I brought someone in, would they be able to take work off my plate so I could then focus in on bringing in new business to support them being inside of my agency. Now, if you're buried by work and you're thinking about hiring someone, understand first, know when to hire. And if you can afford 50% of that person's wage, that's the time to start thinking about it, especially if that hire means you can focus in on revenue generating activities. And number two, reduce the stress and scariness of bringing in an employee by understanding that they come with a financing plan built in. You get to pay them over time, and you get to change your mind if it doesn't work out. So if you're building the websites, managing the servers, sending out the invoices, and sweeping the floors, it's time to consider that it might be time to look for some help.